Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that Beethoven was deaf in the last 10 years of his life when he composed many of his most famous musical works? Listen closely as we learn about why Beethoven left school to support his family at the age of 12, how he was unable to marry the woman he loved because of his lower social standing, and how his work influenced numerous famous composers for years to come. It is said that at the moment of his death, an immense peal of thunder rang out in a storm.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today we are taking a deep dive into the extraordinary and I think really tortured life of Ludwig van Beethoven.
It's an incredible story.
It is. And our mission today is to try and understand what might be the greatest paradox in all of musical history.
How he created his greatest work in total silence.
Exactly. How did this man, who is, universally seen as one of the most powerful composers ever, create these towering masterpieces while his world was just collapsing into absolute silence?
Yeah, and it's fascinating because we're not just talking about a great composer. We're talking about a genuine seismic shift in culture.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Beethoven is really the ultimate transitional figure. He's the bridge that connected the, let's say, the refined structure of the classical era.
Right, I think Mozart, Haydn.
Exactly. He connected them with the emotional intensity and sort of the individualism of the Romantic era that came right after, with composers like Brahms.
So he didn't just write music, he was actually redefining it.
He fundamentally redefined it, widening the entire scope of the sonata, the symphony, the concerto, and the string quartet, all of it.
That is a huge claim, redefining 4 major musical forms. And the groundwork for that genius, it seems, came straight out of immense personal suffering.
It really did.
Let's look at those foundations. He was born in Bonn, Germany, baptized on December 17, 1770. Our sources suggest his birthday was probably the 15th or 16th.
A small detail.
A small detail, but what isn't small is the darkness of his early life. We found extensive documentation detailing the just extraordinary brutality he suffered at the hands of his alcoholic father.
And that is such a crucial context for understanding the man he became. I mean, his father saw him as a cash cow.
Trying to make him the next Mozart.
Trying to force him into being the next Mozart. And the abuse was relentless. It was systematic. He was reportedly beaten, sometimes locked in the cellar, all while being forced to practice.
And what was he playing?
The lessons were focused on the violin and the clavier. That's a stringed keyboard instrument, which was popular then. But this was not mentorship. This was trauma. Trauma in the name of art.
And you can see how that would instill a volatile temper in him and that fierce independent streak he was known for.
Absolutely.
Yet despite all of that, the talent was undeniable. And tragically, it was necessary.
Very necessary.
He couldn't afford a long education. He had to withdraw from school at age 10.
Just 10 years old.
Because his father could no longer support the family financially. And by age 12, he published his first composition. This wasn't just artistic curiosity. It was a professional necessity.
And that necessity quickly pushed him into the established structures of the day. To help support his family, he got on the royal court payroll.
With a modest salary.
A modest salary as an organist. But that placement gave him 2 critical things: stability and, more importantly, access. Access to the greatest musical minds of the time.
Exactly. Before he became the revolutionary, he was a student of the establishment. The sources are really clear that Beethoven became a pupil of the great Austrian composer Joseph Haydn.
And that lineage is so important.
Why?
Because it frames his eventual stylistic rebellion. He was taught the rules by the master who had, along with Mozart, pretty much written the playbook for the classical symphony.
Wow.
There's actually a great anecdote in our sources that shows just how close these geniuses were. Haydn performed his piece, The Musical King, for the Austrian Emperor Joseph II on Christmas Day, 1781.
Okay.
And in the audience that night was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who had performed for the emperor just the night before on Christmas Eve.
So these titans were all working in the same small circle.
Competing, collaborating, all within a few blocks of each other. Beethoven learned from them, and then ultimately he shattered their constraints.
And his early work already hinted at that monumental ability. When the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II died, Beethoven, who was still only 19,
just a teenager, really,
he composed the cantata on the death of Emperor Joseph II. It was just so complex, so moving. And technically far beyond what anyone his age should have been able to do.
That cantata is critically important. Johannes Brahms, who came much later, held it in incredibly high esteem. He called it beautiful and noble.
By praise.
It's widely considered Beethoven's earliest undisputed masterpiece. It showed his inherent dramatic flair long before his famous symphonies. It was a sign that the classical framework was already straining under his emotional vision.
Which brings us right to that turning point, where he stopped being a brilliant student and became Beethoven.
The revolutionary.
Right. In the early 1800s, he transitioned into what scholars call his heroic period. This is where those claims you made earlier get real. How did he widen the scope of the symphony? What did he actually change?
Well, the change was dramatic. You can see it in works like Symphony No. 3, the Eroica. Before Beethoven, symphonies were typically elegant, quick affairs, maybe 25, 30 minutes long.
And the Eroica?
The Eroica was revolutionary in its scale. It was nearly twice as long. But he wasn't just writing longer movements. He was extending key structural parts, like the coda, the ending section, and turning it from a quick wrap-up into a complex, dramatic, essential summary of the emotional journey.
So he took the basic framework and just stretched it to its breaking point, filling it with this new emotional drama.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He introduced a profound emotional weight that music just hadn't carried before. The second movement of the Eroica is a massive, incredibly moving funeral march, something you'd never find in a symphony of that type before.
And he expanded the orchestra itself, right?
Oh, yeah. He demanded more brass, and he started using trombones in works like the Fifth and Ninth Symphonies. These weren't just flourishes. They were architectural demands needed to support the huge emotional story he was telling.
And this incredible artistic revolution was happening against the backdrop of this utterly cruel personal crisis.
The onset of his deafness.
He began going deaf at around age 26.
A composer losing his hearing. It's almost an unimaginable affliction. And the timing is so important for you, the listener, to grasp. Most of his greatest, most enduring works were composed during the last 10 years of his life.
When he was either severely impaired or profoundly deaf.
He composed the most powerful sound the world had ever heard while living in silence.
And that crisis was deepened by a personal heartbreak around 1801. He fell deeply in love with an upper-class Hungarian countess he was tutoring.
But they were forbidden to marry. The rigid social codes of the time, he was of a lower social standing, and that was that.
Another layer of isolation.
And that heartbreak directly birthed one of the most recognizable, haunting pieces ever written. He dedicated his piano sonata No. 14, which we all know as the Moonlight Sonata, to her.
When you listen to that piece, especially that first movement, knowing it's a dedication to forbidden love, at the exact moment his world was going silent, it's devastating.
It is. The sources show the psychological toll. There's this deeply poignant quote from him that captures his feeling of being separated from the world.
What does it say?
He wrote, "No friend have I. I must live by myself alone, but I know well that God is nearer to me than others in my art, so I will walk fearlessly with him."
Wow, that isolated perspective, that's what fueled the next decade of his work.
It really is. And you have to ask, how did he even work when he could no longer hear pitch or timbre or volume accurately? He couldn't hear the orchestra he was writing for.
So how did he do it?
The sources show he would often lie on the floor and put his head against his piano, trying to feel the vibrations in the wood through the floorboards.
That's such a vivid, desperate image.
It is. But ultimately, he relied on his absolute mastery of music theory and structure. He wrote the music based entirely on his inner memory and internal hearing. He knew, mathematically, how a chord or a key change would sound before it was ever played.
His mind became the concert hall.
The perfect, silent concert hall.
Which brings us to what's often called the prolific decade, from about 1803 to 1812. The sheer volume of music he produced while getting deafer is almost unbelievable.
Let's list it. It's staggering.
1 opera, 6 symphonies, including symphonies 3 through 8, 4 solo concertos, 5 string quartets, 7 piano sonatas, and 72 songs.
That output just confirms it. His suffering didn't hinder his genius, it channeled it. But the physical reality eventually became a public problem.
In 1811.
Yeah, by 1811, his failing hearing interfered dramatically when he was supposed to perform his own Piano Concerto No. 5. He just couldn't trust his performance ability anymore.
Which sets the stage for what has to be one of the most heartbreaking scenes in all of musical history.
The 1824 premiere of his final major work, Symphony No. 9.
His crowning achievement. With the incredible fourth movement, Ode to Joy, featuring a choir.
a completely radical addition to a symphony at the time. And Beethoven insisted on being on the stage, sort of co-conducting, even though he knew he couldn't hear.
And the sources paint this just agonizing picture. The audience is in raptures, applauding wildly, but Beethoven, lost in his silent world, he couldn't hear a thing.
He couldn't hear the torrent of sound he had just created. A performer in the orchestra actually had to turn him around so he could see the applause, see the handkerchiefs waving.
And only then did he realize how successful it was.
It was this moment of tragic public realization that he was completely cut off from his own creation. He reportedly wept. It was a crushing final moment. He never performed in public again after that.
That silence, it became his final collaborator. So let's widen the lens now and look at the broader tradition he was working within.
The one he inherited from Haydn and Mozart.
Right. This vast classical framework that continues to affect our culture today.
It connects him to the enduring power of music. When we talk about these classical masters, it isn't just about symphonies. It's about melodies that have defined Western culture for centuries. And nowhere is that tradition more universally felt than in the music written for the holiday season.
That's a key distinction. While Beethoven's symphonic work is, unrivaled, he stands in this long lineage of composers who created these enduring melodies.
For instance, if you look back a generation to Johann Sebastian Bach, he gave us the monumental Christmas oratorio. It's structured across 6 parts, meant to be performed over the entire holiday season.
And of course, there's the work that's maybe most associated with this season today, even though it was originally for Easter.
George Frederick Handel's Messiah from 1741. And you also see how these composers shaped the music we actually sing. Felix Mendelssohn, for example, he took a traditional melody and adapted it for the iconic hymn Hark, the Herald Angels Sing.
And even Beethoven's contemporaries were contributing. Franz Schubert composed his Ave Maria in 1825.
And the tradition just kept going. You have Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker Suite, first performed in December of 1892. The point is that Beethoven's incredible contribution sits within this broader, shared history of genius, creating lasting art for moments of great cultural significance.
Bringing us back to the man himself, his story ends with the kind of dramatic flair you would almost expect from the composer of the Fifth Symphony. He died at age 56 on March 26, 1827, and our sources note he fell ill during a terrible storm.
And the final detail is it's unforgettable. It adds this mythological weight to his end. It's said that, as he lay dying, an immense peal and thunder rang out through the storm.
A powerful final flourish for a man whose life was defined by the drama of sound and silence.
Exactly.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener? Our ultimate synthesis is this. Beethoven's music, written through staggering personal suffering, from childhood abuse to thwarted love to the loss of his most critical sense, it remains completely unrivaled in its passion and scope.
It's a reminder of the power of art created against all odds. His music, particularly those uplifting movements like the Ode to Joy, it invites a profound sense of catharsis, of inspiration.
We've covered a wide tradition of classical pieces today, but we really focus on the incredible passion of Beethoven. We encourage you to reflect on the power of this music.
Think about it. Do you have a favorite classic Christmas hymn or a favorite classical piece?
And when you listen to any of the works we mentioned, the Moonlight Sonata or that famous Ode to Joy, take a moment. Listen, but keep the context of his profound struggle and his silence in mind.
How does it change your experience of the sound, knowing it was written in the quiet of his mind?
That's the power of genius that faced the impossible and won.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.